Welcome back. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of EML. And it starts out EML in terms of, and they talk about an ethical, moral person, ethical, moral actions of a leader, responsibility and accountability. And I think that's going to be an interesting concept when we get to there. And then, complicating questions. And if you've read the text or haven't read the text, but they explain all of this in fairly decent detail. I think it's maybe table 6.1, maybe. And then in 6.2, when you start to look at that table, the ethical moral person, it's driven by a person's moral development and reasoning. And they go through 3 levels of them. And to me, the levels kind of blur together. And they even make a comment somewhere in the text about it's not really a stage. So it's not like it's not like elementary school, junior high, high school. You're not graduating from one stage to the next. You can actually be, functioning across multiple at the same time. But level 1, they talk about pre-conventional. And the definition that they give us in the text is a level of moral development at which an individual is primarily concerned with following rules or laws in order to avoid penalty or punishment, acts in accordance with self-interest. And what does it mean with self-interest? Go back to the 3 pillars that, the basic pillars of economics: opportunity cost, making decisions at the margin, self-interest. And self-interest is typically thought of, in an economic sense anyway, as optimization, trying to maximize something, trying to minimize something. I'm a consumer. I'm trying to maximize my utility, trying to maximize the benefit and the satisfaction I get from consuming a good or service. So that's what they're talking about, self-interest. And one of the, individuals where they're concerned about laws, but they're also working in their self-interest. Think of individuals that file their income taxes. To me, income taxes, typical federal government, not very well defined, a lot of gray area. You could put 50 of us in a room together and read the tax law and might come out with 50 different, understandings to that tax law. But again, individuals, they don't want penalty or punishment, and that's the way they behave in their capacities. And then level 2, it's conventional, and it's a level of moral development in which an individual falls in line with groups. And they say fraternities, sororities, clubs, social entities, religious affiliation, cultural norms with which he or she identifies, adheres to laws of society, correlating existing rules, laws with morality, and if it's legal, it must be moral. Interesting concept. If it's legal, it must be moral. I guess I've never thought of it that way. I'm not sure I agree with it, but anyway, that's embedded in the definition they have. And they actually make the comment that when it comes to leadership, and especially on the EML front, this is the one that's most prevalent. Think about being in a fraternity or sorority in college. There were, guidelines and laws and regulations in place for the Greek system within the university. You can also think about religious affiliations. There are a multitude of religious affiliations, and to me, we all, all the religious affiliations have some kind of quirks that define them from all the others. So, and we'll talk about a few of those a little later on, but what they're saying is they kind of go with the flow of society. And again, if it's legal, it must be moral. And then the 3rd level, post-conventional, and it's a level of moral development in which an individual acts in accordance with one's own developed, in parentheses, sense of values or principles pertaining to justice and what is right and wrong. Not a bad definition. I probably find myself more in this level, maybe sometimes in the conventional level, but in my leadership style, I find myself probably maybe straddling that line between conventional and post-conventional. They talk about, concepts being in the eyes of the beholder, again, perception. It's, somewhat nebulous. If you look at that definition, it's kind of nebulous. Something comes to mind. So again, so I've been in healthcare most of my career, COVID vaccines. So, people had a sense of right, or had their own developed sense of right and wrong, and they took different sides. And so not a bad, I guess, example. The authors also go on and says, independent manner regarding ethical and moral values might violate the law to pursue their own perception of justice. Now we're talking about vigilante. I'm not sure I've ever violated the law to pursue my own perception of justice. I've definitely spoken up multiple times throughout the years, and sometimes you get your hands slapped and sometimes you don't, but it's still, I think there's certain points along the way that you bring attention and point out certain attributes or certain specifics that, especially when you're in a large group trying to go through a decision-making process. And it says, tends to put others and greater good above their own self-interest. And I think if you're managing a team and you have maybe you go back to that managing with love that we had. I've always had a little trouble with managing with love, but because I've always been results driven, but still, if a lot of times you'll find yourself putting your team above your own self-interest. And again, it talks about might function in multiple stages at the same time. So it's not like you're graduating from one stage to the next. You're just kind of and again, what does it go back to? Goes back to situation, goes back to context, goes back to your followers, goes back to your leader characteristics. And at this point, especially in these three levels, I think maybe in the last one especially, you're kind of functioning, talking about normative and positive statements. Normative statements is what the world should be. Positive statements would be what the world is. And I think a lot of these leaders, in their mind, they are functioning almost like policymakers, government officials. They're living in the normative state because to them, they're trying to play in the sandbox, trying to correct market failures. And it's all based on their perception of what the world should be. And then a couple of comments they point out: moral development can be in the eyes of the beholder. Perception is the key. Again, it goes back to perception. Conventional morality is fluid, changes with the times, judged historically rather than the current. And they bring up the founding fathers because the majority of them were states that at that time owning slaves was not illegal, and a lot of them owned slaves. So that, if you look back, it's over the last few years, they've torn down statues of a lot of our founding fathers because of the slavery issue. And the new normal, that may be what we're moving toward. When you talk about presidents of the United States, somebody made a comment the other day on, I don't know, Fox Business or Fox News, one of those stations, that Jimmy Carter was, judged on a historical basis, probably the worst president we'd had in our lifetime. So, and this individual was, I don't know, it's hard for me to guess age. I'm guessing this individual is late 60s, early 70s. So this individual lived through a lot of presidents, but that was his comment. And I think a lot of people will kind of go along with that. Now, we've got some issues in the United States now. So, historically, let's say 30 or 40 years down the road, what are the historian's going to look back on and say, what happened with COVID and issues that kind of spun off from COVID. And then they jump into actions of a leader. And these are actions to demonstrate EML. Serve as a role model for ethical values, and that's where they talk about walk the talk. Demonstration of courage, enforcing ethical, moral standards, openly communicating and sharing information, and we want to talk about that in a few minutes, and avoiding abusiveness. To me, the avoiding abusiveness, to me, that's just a given. You're as a manager, I've never seen a manager or a leader, period, that was successful by being abrasive and abusive to the team. To me, that's just, I don't know. To me, again, my perspective, it's just it's a given. I don't know why they keep going into that. And the role model for ethical values, and the leaders understand that they're on stage all the time. They walk the talk, others to do, if not willing to do it themselves. So again, I've had a lot of weekends over the years where I've gone in and worked, had projects we had to get done. And sometimes I reach out to individuals and ask them to come in and help. Sometimes I don't, depending on the time crunch. But I've never asked any of my team to do something that I wouldn't do myself. I think that's just, again, to me, that's just common sense. It's not common sense, I guess, for everybody, but to me, it's common sense. Demonstration of courage. Moral courage involves strength to work through challenges and fears. And then again, moral principles or uncertainty. Speak up about perceived injustices. And if you're, as a leader, to me, again, that is just something that's just the expectation of being a leader, to speak up if you notice injustices. Now, sometimes they appear to be injustice, goes back to perception. They appear to be injustices, but if you start asking questions, you'll find out they're not really injustices after all, that there was a rationale for it and a common sense decision-making process. And again, that goes back to communication. Reach out and communicate and ask questions. And if you're a little timid on doing it, most companies, especially if you're in healthcare, all have a fraud hotline that you can pick up a phone and call and voice your concerns. It's anonymous. And so there's always a fraud hotline if you're a little timid or a little uncertain about speaking up on your own. EMLs make decisions pertaining to ethics and ethical infrastructure. Cause problems for leaders because sometimes it is unpopular. And it's caused me problems in the past. But that's part of being a leader. You assume the responsibility of a leader. And again, it's not a popularity contest. As long as you're making decisions that are fair and equitable, most of your followers will respect you for that. And they will view that as, being have a high level of integrity. So not all your decisions are going to be popular. That's just a given. Consistency, and here's where they get into, when you make the decisions, if your consistency in enforcement, I think I've always been, if you're consistent in the way you enforce your principles, 90% of the time you're going to be okay. And there's also, as a leader, in the text, they call it sentinel-like qualities. And as a leader, you can have these sentinel-like qualities. And if you have these sentinel-like qualities, you don't have to be a heavy-handed leader because your team will understand what you're doing. Some people get confused about, healthcare or the term sentinel. And in healthcare, and I ran a fraud and abuse team at Blue Cross and Blue Shield. And we were working with the FBI with a fraud task force in Western New York, and we were sending some providers to jail. Not only had they been stealing from health plans in the Buffalo market, but we took them to court, criminal case, and they were sent to prison. And it was a powerful sentinel effect for the other individuals, the other providers in the community, because they knew somebody was watching, looking over their shoulder. Same thing with the IRS. I don't even know what percentage anymore of tax returns are audited. I'm guessing 0.5%, maybe if that. I don't even know what the numbers are. But because the IRS is there, it is a powerful sentinel effect. And as a leader, you can be an extremely efficient leader if you've got that sentinel-like quality. Don't and this is another important point, don't overemphasize enforcement of the laws. Mention them a few times, make sure everybody understands what they are, and as long as you communicate, you should be okay. And they talk about applying tough love. So you've got some leaders that it's kind of like that, hear no evil, see no evil. And then you've got others, so that's on one end of the continuum. You've got others that are just, lead with fear on the other end of the continuum. And somewhere in the middle, you can apply tough love. And, again, 90% of the time, you're going to be in good shape because if you have communicated with your team. EML will lead towards open communication and the sharing of information. And to me, the sharing of information is one of the difficult parts, because if they talk in the text about don't be a mushroom farmer, then that's concept that a lot of people, I've been in organizations where I felt like a mushroom, kept in the dark and fed bullshit or BS all the time. And that's what you end up with. And that is just, from a leader perspective, that is difficult because, and I'll just let me think. Well, when I worked at United, we were constantly faced with earnings per share and hitting corporate profit goals. And you had, the quarterly earnings calls, and there was always a significant level of pressure and stress that was applied to meet those earnings calls. And there was, for a lot of your equity-based health plans, they're kind of they called it Black Monday. So a lot of times the Monday after Thanksgiving holiday, if they were trying to cut expenses, they would take and start laying people off between Thanksgiving and Christmas. That was a terrible time to lay people off. But that's the way they worked the situation. And it wasn't just United, it was, Health Net. A lot of places where I've worked went through that process, lay people off, and then get it through the Q4 earnings, take the earnings call, and then they start hiring people back in, Q1 of the next year. But that's what you run into with a lot of these communication and information sharing, because a lot of information, especially that impacts a follower's livelihood, whether it be with a family or maybe it's just an individual, but when you're starting to impact their livelihood, you as a leader would like to pass that information on to them if you know about it, but corporate guidance or corporate governance won't allow you to pass that information on. And a lot, you hear people talk about need to know basis and, leading with love but not fair. And again, talking about the mushroom, keep in the dark and, feed them BS. But, speaking and acting truthfully. And then they talk about omission is as bad as, commission. So commission's a lie and omission is just not telling all the truth. But one way that I have been able to get around it in the past is, and it didn't matter what team, what organization I worked for, I always had monthly staff meetings. Bring everybody together, talk about our goals, here's where we are, here's where we need to be. And as you went through, Q1, Q2, Q3, especially when you got to Q3, and if it looked like you're going to have trouble with your goals, I would always couch it just in basic microeconomic terms or finance terms, talking about, guys, if we can't pull this thing together and hit our goals, company's not going to meet the return on investment, and they're going to start looking at the opportunity cost, and they may take some of us and shift us to other functional areas that might need some warm bodies to hit their goals. Maybe they are customer oriented or client based goals. But if we don't pull together and don't work as a team and we don't hit these goals, we're not going to view it as a value based team to the corporation, because at some point corporations, they all work off of marginal benefit, marginal cost, and you keep plugging along as long as marginal benefits greater than marginal cost. But at some point, when it flips and marginal benefit becomes less than marginal cost, then at that point, their company's going to put the brakes on, and they could definitely be terminating individuals, laying people off, shuffling us around for sure if they want to keep individuals within the company. And that actually worked really well, because individuals, as you couched it in those terms, you weren't telling them that there was potential layoffs. You were just laying it out in a economic, financial perspective. Hey, here's our goals. And most of my teams have all been financially based goals, and we're not hitting the return on investment. We've got X number of individuals, and we're not hitting the return on investments for those warm bodies. And either, if we can't hit the return on investment, maybe we don't need those warm bodies. Maybe they could be allocated to some other area in the company. So there are a lot of ways that you can couch this and kind of indirectly pass on information in terms that most individuals, if they don't understand, you can help them understand from an economic and financial perspective. EML is attempt to avoid abusive and exploitive behavior. And again, to me, they shouldn't even have to mention this. This is like management 101. I don't understand why people are still trying to abuse individuals that work for them. I think they throw out a term that, and I don't know how accurate it is, but in the text, it was something like, $24 billion annually that abusive behavior costs the economy through ineffective workers, lost work days, those kind of things. And, some leaders are hostile and verbal. Some have nonverbal behavior. Some are active, where they call them passive aggressive, lead with fear. Tough love is, if enforced in just and compassionate manner, usually actually works. Again, if you're communicating and everybody understands where we need to be, I think it's definitely has the opportunity to make you a better leader. So to me, communication, walk the talk, share information as much as possible. You don't want to circumvent the organizational directive, but there are ways to share that information without formally saying hey team, they're going to start laying some people off. But there are ways around it, and I think if you follow those, you'll be great. And that's where I'm going to stop there, and we'll come back in a few minutes, and they have 3 or 4 questions in the book. We'll kind of go through that, and you work through those questions, and then we'll come back, and probably a 4th segment will be that Soviet leadership, and comparing it to the traditional leadership. So talk to everybody in a few minutes.